Welcome to the Masters of Business. My name is Morris Mizalowski. I'm a business futurist, and together we're going to explore the year of 2025. We're going to look at the way that business might be, the things that you and I are likely to see, want and do, the way culture is going to change, the way technology will change, and importantly, we're going to figure out what you and I need to do right now to begin to make sense and profit out of it. The first thing we need to do is understand that the future doesn't really exist. It's one of these ephemeral things that we talk about. It's a romantic Disney notion that we have, that tomorrow is a space that will arrive by itself, that on some mythical date in the calendar, all of a sudden this thing will pop out and a new world will evolve. The reality is that the future takes a lot of hard work. It starts right here, right now. Our conversation is the beginning of your future. What you and I need to do is to figure out what's important ahead. The role, honestly, is that there is no magic here. There's nothing untoward. There are things that you and I know that are more likely to occur. And what you and I need to do is to figure out what those things are for your business and for your business alone. So the future starts right here, right now, with this conversation. You know, there are some strange things happening. For 34 years, I've done this looking forward stuff. The reality is that when I started my practice, 5 years was about the horizon sign. And when we talked about a cultural change, we talked about a 25-year change. You and I are now seeing dramatic changes day in, day out. There are businesses that we take for granted, like Facebook, like Uber, like Alibaba, like Airbnb. We talk about them as if they're all natural beings. All of them are under 10 years old. And what's even more extraordinary about each and every one of them, the multi-billion-dollar corporations that you and I now use as ordinary case studies in conversation, is that none of them own a physical asset. Facebook owns absolutely no content whatsoever. They rely on you and I to put it up. Airbnb does not own a hotel, but in 7 years has become the fourth largest hospitality provider on the planet. Uber, similarly, does not own a car, does not train anybody in how to drive, but they are now the default in this technology space. And that's really the journey of tomorrow, that the marketplace is just so different. The things that you and I need to be aware of are so markedly different from the things of yesterday. Not better, not worse, just extremely different. So some of the changes that we're seeing ahead, one of the most fundamental shifts that I've noticed over the last 10 years or so is this shift to me, that the world now revolves around me. It revolves around my thinking. It revolves around what I want. Prior to that, it really was a matter of the world was something that we had to go to. The world was something I had to discover. I had to go to a library. I had to go to a client. I had to go to a retail outlet. All of these things were things, and what I took was a generic product. It was something that they offered me and that I accepted without much change to it. I now pull out a mobile phone, a smartphone, and I expect the world to come to me. I expect the world to give me a specialist answer. I can now find the answers to the most inane things I never thought to ask about 10 years ago. The world of me is really the beginning of our journey into tomorrow. It's one of the fundamental things that we need to understand, and we'll explore that notion as we work our way through. There are some other fundamental issues on the planet. The first of them is a huge change in demographics. The reality is that for the first time ever in our human existence, we have 6 generations alive and living. We have everybody from our builder generation, which are 80 years plus, right through to Gen A, which are those that were born from 2010 onwards. Each of those is a new demographic. Each of those sees the world in a peculiar and particular way. For some industries, like pharmacy, it's an incredible new space. For others, they have yet to see where this space might evolve. When I talk to my builder clients, for instance, we're talking about building residential property now that are multi-generational, where 2 or 3 generations might live together. So lots of things to be taken out of this 6 generations. The question for you at the moment is, are you attracting all of these generations? Which ones of them are relevant to you? How, if they're relevant to you? What do they buy? What do they want? Importantly, how do they want to be communicated to? We're going back to this question of me, and each of them requires you to do something slightly or grossly different. What is it that you need to do to get in contact with each of these generations? We also are moving to a space that I refer to as an ambient world. We've been kids in a lolly shop for a long time. We've been excited by the box, excited by the screen, really excited to show off our new toys and our new apps. It was the technology itself that got lots of people excited. We're kind of over it now. We're into a space where it's really the end result that's important. It's like electricity and gas. We feel as if it's always been there. We're taking it for granted. And increasingly, it's not going to be the iPhone, the Samsung, or the IBM that's important. It really is what those things give me. It's how the world changes because I'm using it. And this ambient world we're moving into is not hung up on what technology you're using. They're hung up on the end result. The fact that you have an app, the fact that you have a website, the fact that any of these exist really aren't all that important to them because it's taken for granted. Of course they exist. But how am I going to interact with it? How is it important to me? That's really the question we need to move forward on. So forget getting hung up on the iPads or whatever else it is. It really is about the end result that you and I need to talk us to. We also have this notion, for me, that we're moving into a dynamic life. Work-life balance never really made sense. I rallied against it for 20 years or more. Work-life balance assumed we weren't human. It assumed we could put part of ourselves up on a shelf while we did something else. And that might have been okay before we had technology, because when we were at work in the old days, without the internet, without all of these things, we could kind of park our lives outside because we didn't really get many people coming in. There wasn't much encroachment in our day-to-day work. With new technology, with Facebook, with Twitter, and all the other things that you and I are so engrossed in, with the fact that we carry around with us this 24/7 ambient piece of technology, all sorts of things happen at any particular time in our lives. And what you and I have done over the last 8 years or so is to understand that we want to take care of whatever that thing is right here, right now. It's important to me at this second. I don't really want to wait till 5 o'clock. That doesn't make any sense. I've seen it now, I want to action it. And a lot of the world of work moving forward is tied up in this. I don't believe that we'll have a 9-to-5 workspace anymore. Again, that's an industrial revolution model. In the industrial revolution, many hands made light work. Turn up at 9 o'clock, work through to 5 o'clock, come back the next day. Let's do it for 5 days, take 2 days off for the weekend. Let's do it by 48 weeks, take 4 weeks off, but you better be back at the end of the holidays to do it all again. Do it for 40 years, retire, get a cake, get a watch, get a pension, and then die after 7 years. And that was pretty much the way that the world of a baby boomer was. Today's life is so different. We have this ambient technology. We're always on. We're always thinking about a whole lot of things. In the 9-to-5 space, which is gone, is going to be replaced by project and task. Increasingly, you and I are going to be doing work where and when it's appropriate, rather than going to a fixed space, rather than doing it at a fixed time. The reality is that whatever we do, whether it's work, whether it's charity, whether it's sport, it's all going to be dictated by where and when and how and why it's best to do it. That's tomorrow's trigger. I just finished a large project with one of our top 4 banks looking at their workforce through to 2025. And we found, much to our surprise, that 60% of their workforce, again this is of a large bank, already works project and task driven. Because today's banking world doesn't require tellers in branches the way they did before. It requires people to answer your phone at 2 o'clock in the morning when you want it. It requires a bank lender that can come to you at the time that's appropriate for you. So they've changed their workforce. They've changed their hours. They've changed their people so that they can suit the end customer. Again, coming back to that notion of hyper-personalised me. We also have this growing belief that we will live to 140 plus. A baby boomer will definitely live to 100. A Gen X, a Gen Y, a Gen Z, most probably to 120. And kids that are born today will live to 150. That's given the advances we have in technology. It's given the way that culture's changed. It's given it the way that we look after ourselves. This longevity means that our life as we know it will change forever. It means that we'll be working into 80 and 90 years of age. Now again, I don't think this is going to be a 9-to-5. I think this is going to be project and task driven. We'll come in and out of things as we need to do them. We most probably will have one central form of income, but I think we'll supplement that with a whole lot of other incomes. So we might be an accountant or a landscaper, but then again, we might jump into an Uber, or perhaps rent out our property Airbnb, or do something else to bring an income as we need it, where and when. We will start to do all kinds of things that make this long life purposeful and very different from the one today. because 140 or 120 or 100 years is going to be lived in relatively good health. We are going to be able to sustain ourselves, and it's going to mean a huge shift in who we are, what we are, the sorts of products, the sorts of services, and what's important to us. And there are whole lots of new industries that will come out of that as well, whole lots of new services that people will need. Think aging. Think service industry itself will be more prepared and have more income, so we will be able to get people to mow our grass, walk our dogs, and do all kinds of things. Lots of thoughts in there as well. So think about, if we do have this aging population, this population that's growing, but increasingly living to a longer age, what products, what services are you offering now that you might be able to push into this new economy as we see it over the next 10 or 20 years? We also have the notion, if you're an employer, that today's kids, the ones finishing their education, will have 6 careers and 14 jobs. Yeah, 6 careers and 14 jobs. What that means is an average tenure of about 2.8 to 3 years for each of them staying at a job. It also means our education system needs to be overhauled. It means our expectations of our employees need to be overhauled. It means we need to think about how we might be able to sustain them and how we might be able to get them to stay with us longer than they otherwise might by this kind of demographic. There's lots of things that are going to happen around this, and it will change our labour force. Again, are you ready for this? Are you part of this? Is this something that you can perhaps add service and product to? Because many people are. We're also now moving into what I refer to as an anticipatory phase. Technology over the last decade or so has given us the notion that just in time, just as we want something, we can pull out our mobile device and we can find the answers to those questions we never thought to ask. We can get a bit of a map up and figure out where we're going to. We might be able to talk to somebody, or perhaps to tweet or do something else. They're just in time. But that's not really what we want as human beings. As human beings, what we really want is a world that understands us. What we really want is a world that gets what we want to know before we know we want it. We want a personal assistant. We want somebody that's almost a genie in a bottle. And this anticipatory phase of technology is exactly that. It's going to figure out what we want ahead of us even knowing we want it. And it's going to bring it to a screen near us. It'll actually tell us about the world we're just about to walk into, and it'll arm us for it, give us information, give us direction, give us whatever we need to know. A really great example of this is Google Now. If you haven't downloaded it or played with it, I'd suggest have a look at it, and there are Apple versions and also other ones. But what Google Now does is, with your permission, you give it access to your library, you give it access to your diary, to your searches and whatever else you feel comfortable hooking up to it. Of course, Google says that nobody else will look at it, just you, so we must believe them. I've been using it for a couple of years, and for me, it tracks all of my flights, it tracks all of my movements, it gives me my diary. It tells me in advance if I'm flying to somewhere, whether the plane's on time, and it does that for 24 hours in advance of that. It tells me the best road to take between where I'm travelling to and where the airport is. It gives me the weather in the local place. As I'm walking around these new spaces I haven't been to before, it's telling me what's ahead, tells me the kinds of restaurants I want. All of this is anticipatory. And technology over the next year or so on mobile phones is all going to have this kind of information as its front screen. Apple and Android have both said that. So within a couple of years, you and I will wonder, didn't the world always provide that information for me? Didn't it always tell me what I needed to know? Was there a time I really had to go and search for something? And that's the world of anticipation. It's going to change the way that we market, the way that we talk to each other, the way that we engage with the world. Because the assumption will be that our technology, on our behalf, will be able to find what's important and meaningful to me. And it will tell me about that. And that's the way we will engage. We will engage because my technology understands me. It tells me enough about you that I want to work with you. And by wanting to work with you, we'll then communicate, we'll then market, we'll then buy and sell. This is a fundamental shift, and one that I believe will take for granted very, very quickly. But as marketers, as people with small business, there's still great opportunity because most of the world is still not ready for this. But when they are, they're going to want to deep dive into it. It's going to be the assumed pattern we have. One of the questions I get asked often is if we're moving into this space, where the internet contains all the wisdom in the world. I no longer have to store it inside my brain. I've forgotten phone numbers, I've forgotten addresses, I've forgotten all kinds of things I might once have to remember. And I've done that because I rely on the internet now to have all the information. I can pull my mobile phone out, I can find an answer to something, I can look at my diary. I don't even have to remember a phone number anymore because you and I just press a picture of someone's face and automatically they're dialed up for us. That's the role of information. So that's one of the things the internet does. What we're going to increasingly see is that technology, and you'll see I've spelt it differently with the word knowledge in the middle of it. Technology, our phones, our devices, all the things we carry on us, using this anticipatory advantage and using the me philosophy, will begin to sort through the internet literally from the last millisecond backwards. Find what's important to you and then bring it back for you to use. If that's the case, and if we're seeing already that lots of jobs that used to be involved within the storage of information, within the retrieval of information, we're seeing routine jobs routinely disappear over the last couple of years. And that's all because of the two things we've just described. Either the information can be stored really easily inside the internet, in which case those sorts of jobs have disappeared, or the jobs which are routine, which we can figure out really easily, we can put some algorithm to it, we can make it happen without a human being, they're disappearing. And that's the technology side. So what's left for human beings is really what I refer to as artisanal wisdom. I think in many ways we're in fact devolving. We're going back to a time and a space where much of the world was bespoke. It was tailor-made. What you and I need to do now is to accept that the technology exists. Apps are all around us. We really don't care. They're ambient. The information's readily available. And what we as human beings need to do is to ask really great questions. Artisanal wisdom is about not just accepting what the technology tells us. It's rallying against it. It's finding the innovation in the space. It's asking the questions which prove what we've been told by our technology not to be true. That's what the great innovators of today are doing. They're taking information that other people see as 100% gospel, and they're saying, look, I don't have to do it that way. I don't think it makes sense. There's a whole new world, a whole new industry that I can open up if I do it differently. That's this notion that we're moving into. The thing that will be left for humans, you and I, to do into tomorrow is constantly to question, constantly to innovate, to take what we see for being for certain and say it is in fact uncertain. It doesn't have to be that way. There are some really great industries and jobs around in tomorrow's landscape. Lots of them are things we haven't begun even to question, we haven't even begun to think about. What about a telehuman? What about a transhuman? What about a virtual travel agent? Somebody who can take us to somewhere without us actually physically leaving where we are now. Now I know it sounds like science fiction. It sounds like something from the holodeck in Star Trek. But right now, there are people within travel that are beginning to understand that not everybody will be able to physically go from one space to another. We'll still do that, but we won't be able to do it all the time. So there's a whole industry opening up around the ability to be able to virtually travel to somewhere while you're physically standing still. Lots of new industries, lots of burgeoning things seeing. And I'd love you to come back and have a look at this at some later stage. Have a look at the jobs that I think are moving forward and the jobs that we're going to have to forgive and forget, because as wonderful as they were in the past, they're just not as meaningful to us into the future. There are some other really interesting things happening in the space as well. There's this notion of asymmetry, which means that a corporation can be taken on by an individual. It can be taken on by somebody literally sitting in their tracksuit in their garage. We don't have to worry about being the same size as Google to take them on. What we have to have is a really great idea. And this notion of asymmetry is one that's floating around, where anybody, any small business, can take on the largest of businesses. And in fact, if you look at Facebook, if you look at Google, if you look at Uber, and hundreds of other brands that you and I now use, they all started as small business. They all started in the world of asymmetry. Why does the world have to be the way it's been before? I think we can do it differently. I know we can do it differently. I know we can make it profitable. And that's this world of asymmetry. So don't be worried about taking on the Goliaths, because the reality is it's being done every day, and they're being toppled every day as well. It needs great thinking. It needs great innovation to make that happen. The other thing that I'm finding, which I'm loving, is this notion of polar opposites. Companies that just shouldn't be together are starting to form relationships, collaborations. It's kind of like people that you never thought you'd hang out with, but all of a sudden when you do, you realise you're having a really great time with them. That for that period and that space, you are really meaningful to each other. And if nothing comes of it afterwards, that's fine, because here and now, we're profiting from it. Polar opposites. I work with a really large airline, and we've decided that on board, part of the food experience next year will be, of course, the food that this airline provides, and they provide 2 billion meals a year across the planet. 2 billion a year. Is that we're going to form a relationship with a really well-known coffee house. And on board, we're going to offer not only our coffee, but the experience of this branded coffee. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't offer coffee, because of course we can. What it means is that there is a real experience to be had by the traveller. There's this little bit of oasis of time, this theatre, this experience that the onboard traveller will enjoy, I believe, because they'll be able to have this experience of coffee offered in a different way. Polar opposites saw something last year like Opie nail polish team up with Coca-Cola and use the colours of Coke to be able to produce a whole colour range for their nail polish. Now, I know it sounds inane, most of us are not going to do that. But who are the polar opposites in your life? Who are the people that you're sitting there saying that my service, my product sits so nicely with that niche, with that product, with that service? Approach them. Figure out what it is you have to offer them and go up to them regardless of how large they are. Remember, asymmetry is where we're headed. Everybody is equal in this space of tomorrow. What is it that you can offer them? And see if you can form a relationship. Again, it doesn't have to be a joint venture. It doesn't have to be ongoing. As long as it serves you both profitably for the time that that venture's alive. That's the world of tomorrow. You know, we're living in Wild West. We're literally living in the goldfields of the 1880s. We are discovering things and figuring out what it is we might do with them. We're energised about the ability to make money. We're hearing all kinds of things about new products and new services. And I don't think there's ever been a better time for a small business to be alive on the planet than there is now. And I say that because the possibilities abound. The opportunities to do things with less resource have never been so wide before. And the possibility of achieving and succeeding are just incredible. And again, we only need to look at the internet or our media to see example after example of new products, new apps, and new things happening. It's all because of this gold mining that we're going out there on this search. We don't quite know what we're going to find. We don't have the tools, the resources, but we're going to give it a good try. There are so many things out there, so many new trends, so many new things on the horizon. In fact, I've got a list of about 370 things that I'm tracking, which are all new apps, all new thinking. But there are some really obvious ones, some low-hanging fruit that are around that are going to be part of this gold mine of tomorrow, that are going to be the nuggets that you and I pick up as small business owners, and we will melt them down. We will make other purpose of them. Some of them we're going to have to invent. Some of them we've never seen before. And some of them will mean that we will have to forgive and forget industries as they no longer serve us into tomorrow. But that's the joy of being in small business. It's the joy of knowing that 3D printing is around the corner. It's the joy of knowing that we have connected cities coming up ahead, that we have driverless cars, that there are all sorts of things that we will be able to do that we've never done before. You and I need to go out there as gold miners, really panning, really understanding what some of these technologies, some of these new horizon thoughts are, and see whether we can begin to make sense and purpose out of them before the mass market does. And that's the joy of our conversation together. What you and I need to do as we do that is to be mindful that just because we hear about something today doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to take off tomorrow. What you're looking at here is a chart that really is that trough of disillusionment. That just because we see something, it might go quiet for a year or two or a month or two. It doesn't mean it's necessarily disappeared. It means that the marketplace is taking time to digest it. Often we just have to keep up. But sometimes we just have to forget about it, like Google Glass, which is a prime example of this. It came, it was heralded, everybody thought it was going to be the next big thing, and for the moment it's disappeared off our radar. So we need to make sensible decisions about what is ahead for us and what's not. And that's the purpose of our discussion moving forward from here. You and I need to think bigger. We need to take the core of who we are and what we do. We need to understand how we'd like the world to be and react to us. But we really need to understand what the world is going to offer us. What are the new tools, the new thinking, the new apps, the new spaces, the new horizons that are going to open up. And we need to make sure that our business is always forward-facing. It is always about tomorrow. Take the best of who you were, work with that as your core and your base, and then begin to add to it these new horizon points. Because the reality is that the marketplace will do it anyway, even if you don't. There is no get-out-of-jail card free. There just isn't. You can't say to your customers, look, I don't know about 3D printing. I don't know about driverless cars. Look, come back in 6 months and we'll figure it out together then. You and I, as consumers and users, know that that doesn't make sense anymore. We can find 100 replacements for you and I if we really put our mind to it. So waiting for the marketplace just doesn't make sense. We have to be ready for them when they come, when they ask. And often we have to be the thought leader. Sometimes we have to drag it to them, give them a reason to understand why these new things are in their favour, are purposeful for them. But importantly, as small business owners, you and I need to be aware of them. We need to be able to have conversations around them and know how they're going to impact on our business. There's this notion, for instance, riding around now of a sharing economy. The word's used as if it's a brand new thing. You know, it used to be called hippies, it used to be called communist, it used to be called just good old sharing. Many people think this is some kind of philanthropic environment where I have something, I'm willing to let you have it, and when you finish, give it back to me. For some, it absolutely is. But let's put that myth to bed for now, because the reality is that this is a money-making space. All it really is, this sharing economy, is a brand new digital marketplace. Instead of you just being able to sell to your immediate people geographically close to you or those that you can market to, you now have the entire world available. You can find out about anything, anywhere. And with technology today, it's all possible and all available. The sharing economy simply means that I have an asset. There's something that I'm not using all of the time, and I'm happy for you to have that. You might have to pay me for it, you might have to barter for it, but all of that's available. And the reason that's popular now is for a number of reasons. It is, of course, because of the economy. We can't all afford to buy, nor do we want to anymore. Cultural changes means we don't have to prove ourselves the way we once did by owning assets, owning homes and owning cars. Many of us are just happy to use the product, just happy to drive the car, happy to use the holiday house for a week. We don't really want the mortgage over the top of either of them. So for all sorts of reasons, culturally, economically, demographically, this sharing economy, or more important, this global new space, is really just the marketplace that you and I might play in. It's available in all kinds of flavours. We can do almost anything now in this sharing space. We can find, for instance, the notion of freelance work, where we might be able to get someone to design something for us. We might be able to go into something like a Fiverr. A Fiverr allows you, for multiples of $5, to get graphic design done, to have something translated for you, perhaps to get some copywriting done. Really, any service that can be sent across the internet is something that Fiverr will be able to do for you. It's a great example of a low-cost way for you to be able to get things done. If you haven't had a look, have a look at it. And what happens if you want a physical service, if you want someone to do something for you? There are great sites around. There's something like an Airtasker. An Airtasker will find somebody. It's part of the casualised workforce that's becoming really prominent now. Again, it's that non-9-to-5 project task-driven type workforce. An Airtasker will ask you, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to walk your dog? Do you want me to wash the car? Do you want me to pick up something for you? Do you want me to sit in your office and answer your phones? Tell me what you want, how long you want it for. Tell me how much you're going to pay, and I'll put it into the marketplace. We'll find someone around you that's willing to do that for you. All these kinds of spaces now are opening up. They're brand new and they're available and they are a boon to small business. I also want you to think about them though in a very different way. Don't just think about using them, but think about becoming a part of them. KPMG, one of our top 4-tier accounting firms for instance, has embraced this space. They know that their workforce, as much as they like, are not really being used to their maximum capacity. There's always some downtime. So they've built what they call a marketplace. KPMG says to them, if you want to use our people, then tell us what you want. Tell us what the project is. Tell us what the fee is. And we'll find a KPMG person that in their downtime when they're not doing their fully paid clients, they'll be able to get to those tasks for you. And perhaps if you're offering a service, maybe that's a way to even out your lumps, is to go into some of these sites and to use them for you when you've got downtime, to be able to say, look, I might not be able to make my full quid, but perhaps I can make 75 or 60%. And even if I can't do that, I'm still expanding my horizons, opening myself up to new markets. So think about these spaces from a number of angles, not just using them for your business as low-cost ways to get things done, but also as a way for you to even out what it is you do, the services that you offer, for those times when your calendar just isn't as busy as you want them to be. Jump into them and offer your products and services through them, and then turn them off as soon as your normal business comes back on. You can also get all kinds of things funded. There was a time when the only way to find money for a project, an idea, a brand, or an extension was to go to a bank with a fully fledged business plan. You can still do that if you want. But there's microfinancing sites, which are really just part of this new economy, which says, tell me about your idea. Tell me what it is you want done, how much money you want, and by when. And let's see if we can get enough people together, each of them putting in a little bit of money, collectively giving you all the money that you need. And Possible is one of those sites, but you'll find lots of them. And this is a really common way for us to be able to get income now, for us to be able to get some money for that brilliant idea. In fact, if you're thinking about being a startup, one of those rare breeds, often when you go to venture capitalists, when you go to people for money, they'll ask you whether you've been into one of these sites. They want to see evidence that you've been to the marketplace and the marketplace has liked what you've done. And by liking it, the easiest way to show you that is because they've funded your product or your idea. We also have great sites like Kiva, which is a philanthropic site. It allows you to give charity. It allows you to give a woman in India, which is their case study, $100 or part of $100 towards a sewing machine, that with that she'll be able to build a business, change her life, her family's life and her community. So again, part of this very different microfinancing site. We could also do things like Mama Bake, which I love. It's a group of women, and predominantly women in the site. I've never seen a male there. Hope we can get past that gender bias there. But Mama Bake is where a group of women come together once a week. They all bake huge amounts of food, enough for a week. So somebody might come with a huge lasagna, and other people with a huge piece of cake, maybe somebody with a huge salad, and those women will then split all that food up between themselves, take home enough food each to feed their family for a week. But all they've had to contribute is just that one very large meal. Again, part of this new space. Is there a service or product that you can offer in this way? Is there a community that you can come into where you can offer this kind of bartering or this kind of sharing type arrangement? It's really worth investigating whether your current business model can sit in this space at all. Perhaps something like Maven, which allows you to be part of a larger thinking group, paying you for your ideas along the way, is something that you might be able to use to share your expertise. Maybe use GE's option. GE has for a number of years had a site. What they say to their users, to the people around the world, is you've got really great ideas, things we've never thought of before. We'd love you to tell us what your ideas are. Tell us how you see us changing. Tell us what you'd like us to invent. And this GE space is open constantly to the public for them to be able to comment. It's amazing what people will tell you about your products and services in these spaces if you allow them to. And it's not negative, it's mostly positive. And where it is negative, it's something that we can learn from. Don't be afraid to go into these spaces and ask for assistance, ask for help, or be part of that help. And maybe you want something more physical. Maybe you want to go into a shared space. There are lots of hubs around, lots of collaborating spaces where you rent a desk by an hour or by a day or by a week. And what you're able to do there is really feed off the collective energy of all the people in that space. This is a really great site for being able to find all of the collective hubs around, being able to find one near you. It's a good way to get your energy back. If you are working in a small environment, perhaps at home, perhaps doing it on your own, maybe jump into one of these spaces once a week, once a month, collaborate with some people, get some fresh thinking, some fresh ideas. Maybe if you want education, you haven't got the time, the money, the resource, or the inclination to do a formal course. Again, in this collective space, you can go into any one of these sites and you can do a formal or an informal education. You can learn to code, you can learn to do bookkeeping, you can learn all sorts of things. Some of them are quite formal, some of them are informal, but it's all around this shared economy. And the brands in here are the largest universities on the planet. They're definitely not outsiders. Again, part of this new space, this new economy. Lots of things that we can find and learn in there. In this new space that we're talking about, there's so much happening that you and I literally would blow our brains if we were trying to remember and find everything. I said to you earlier that knowledge is kept in the internet, and we're comfortable with that. But what we need to do is have a really good way of retrieving it. We need to know that when we want it, we can do it. And as human beings, you and I have always, since we were put on the planet, always wanted to know more than we currently know. We've always had a thirst for learning more. And this proverbial needle in a haystack that you and I have always thought was impossible, nowadays is not only possible, but we can find millions and billions of needles in a haystack at any given time. And the word around this is big data. Big data is a phrase that's being used a lot. It simply means that there is so much information out there. We're moving into this me hyper-personalized world. Technology helps us to sort through it all. What we're asking now is for something to help us make sense out of it. And big data is the call for that. What big data does is take the notion that what I need to know is out there. I just need to learn to massage it. I need to learn to find it. And then I need to learn to use it. If we're going to use big data, and forget about how large the word sounds, how in awe perhaps we might be of being able to do that. It really isn't all that difficult. And small business, in many ways, is in fact far better at big data. Because what we're able to do is define exactly what we want to know. And that's what's important here. With big data, because there's so much information, you really have to be specific about what it is you want to know, when you want to know it, and what sort of information you want. The more you can refine your search, the more likely you are to be able to find the answers. And we don't need to go to really expensive places necessarily to find them. Start in your own physical records. Start in your digital records. Sort through them. Use the filters of what you want to know to go back and massage the data you have. Use something like a Wolfram Alpha search engine, which allows you to ask really specific questions and get back specific answers. It is different than a Google in the way that it is specific about looking for an answer to your question rather than giving you a million responses. You might be able to do something like perhaps Google Analytics, which is used by the largest of firms and the largest of retailers. Look at how people are searching for that word, that product, that service. What else are they searching for? What are we looking for around that particular idea or that product? That's big data. Once you have the answer to that, you've got empirical evidence of how many people, where, when, and how. That's big data. That's something that you can use to fashion your product and your service. If you want to get more, you might use something like a Salesforce. And again, there are lots of versions of this. But Salesforce is a CRM. What it allows you to do is to contain all your information about your customers, your customer relationship, and all the details, all their buying past habits into one centralized spot. Increasingly, these base CRMs are now adding analytics. They're adding big data functions into them. And we'll see more and more of these apps as we walk our way through. Remember, we're talking about the future. The future starts now. Big data is really only at its beginning. It's nowhere near where we want it to be, but we know it will be much more than it currently is. There are lots of spaces that we might be able to look, lots of apps, lots of products and services that we're about to see come out of this. And perhaps that's one of your new areas, your small business, or your business might be involved with. Perhaps you will be the big data provider, like Kaggle, that started off as a small business, but now is a multi-billion-dollar global corporation, putting together groups of really great thinkers around a particular idea that a corporate might have. Tell me what your challenge is what Kaggle says. I'll put together a group of great thinkers around that idea, and we'll come back to you with our thoughts. It's a really powerful way to get a cohesive tribe around you. Now, narrative science is then pushing into this space because it's not about numbers necessarily. We'll see more of these types of products. What they do is to take what we might see as an Excel spreadsheet as numbers and turn those numbers into a narrative, into an English conversation. It's written in plain English. In fact, something like this is now writing over 400,000 articles that you and I are now reading in our newspapers and our blogs. That's how well attuned this is to the English language. And of course, the holy grail down the track, 10 years from now, artificial intelligence, where our machines will be able to think on our behalf, be able to answer our questions for us. We're looking at trends, we're looking at what might be ahead, what can we add on when we go mining, looking for how our small business might evolve. And one of the big spaces moving forward is the Internet of Things, or as I refer to it, social machines. We've hooked up our lives over the last 30 years, we're all searchable. We're going to find over the next 5 years, and it won't take much longer than that, over the next 5 years, that all of our machines, all of our objects, our cars, our toasters, our front doors, everything will be hooked up to the internet, searchable, and we'll be able to orchestrate them. We'll be able to have a flow. When one thing does something, then something else will take its cue from that, and something else will take its cue. And literally, as we drive up to our garage door, the garage door will open, our lights will turn on, our heating will go on, our kettle will boil, all kinds of things will happen, and it will work across all spaces. In fact, we're moving quickly to what is referred to as a connected city, where literally every object that is owned or known is searchable by somebody. A huge new space, a huge new frontier for us to do business in, and the things that we will offer in and through this have only just begun to be invented and innovated. Perhaps it's something that might tickle your fancy. Maybe it's something that you might want to look at as an adjunct, or maybe as a new business for you moving forward. And you can see how large this industry is going to become. It's literally going to explode over the next 10 years as it moves in income up to a multi-billion-dollar industry. While we're talking about connecting things, we're talking about wearable devices. Over the last 2 or 3 years, you and I have begun to wear Fitbits, we've begun to wear bands, things around us that tell us about how we're engaging with the world, how many steps we're doing, how many breaths we're taking, how far we're running. Expect to see more and more of these devices. I believe within 10 years that we will be wearing 9 of them, and most of them we won't even know. They'll be woven into our clothes, they'll be woven into our shoes. We'll literally be walking around, and each of them will give insights into who we are, what we want, where we're going. And again, with this anticipatory, me-orientated world, each of those will feed information to an ecosystem around us. And that ecosystem will then develop products, services, and offerings in real time ahead of us even knowing it. We're starting to see iBeacon, for instance, come into this space, which allows us to walk into a shop. This iBeacon device, it's Apple, acknowledges who we are, takes information about what we buy, and sends us spruiking information back to our own screens. One of the big pushes moving forward over the next year or so is virtual reality, augmented reality, headsets. We're going to see a lot of them in our retail stores over the next year or so. What they do is take the real world, mask it out by putting a mask on top of us, some kind of a screen, and then inside of that we see this brand new world. It's quite incredible. Already we're training people in these spaces. We train our pilots in these spaces, for instance. We're training nurses, we're training teachers. They see a virtual world inside of the screen, and the body reacts psychologically within a couple of minutes. We are fooled into believing the world is real, and we begin to react as we normally might in a physical world. We're seeing augmented reality, where entire rooms are becoming virtual, where we can take ourselves from the physical world that we're standing in to a world of tomorrow. In this space, which is the cave at Monash University in Melbourne, I've literally flown inside the human brain. I've literally landed on Mars. I've been undersea and done all of that inside of this cave standing in physical space at a university. We're seeing new businesses open up. This is a business that's going to use augmented reality to allow us to play in that space. The world of tomorrow really is quite incredible. We're going to have robots come into our world of tomorrow, and they are not far away. My favourite robot at the moment is Jibo. If you haven't seen Jibo, do a search on it. It's a personal assistant, a little robot that you will buy for about $1,500 that knows again you, the world around you, and anticipates what you want from the world, and then gives you that, and talks to you as if it's almost a live human being. It has really good animation around it too. The reality is that the world of tomorrow is, as we've described already, significantly different from the world we're leaving behind. Not better or worse. What you and I need to do is constantly take a TBI, a to be innovated approach to everything we do. We need to build our innovation muscle. We need to build our tolerance to changing things. We need to release ourselves from the anchors that we have. Every time you say, this is the way it's always been done, it can't be done, I don't have the resources, that's too big to take on. Whatever that excuse is, it's exactly that, an excuse. Realize it to be an anchor, and then we need to move away from it. because anyone that's successful now in the spaces, the brands and the places that you hear about have not only seen the anchors, but literally blown them out of the water. We need to forget about being cogs in the wheel. Because one thing seems to move on to something else is not a good enough reason anymore. It's part of the Industrial Revolution we're leaving behind. There was a fixed way of doing it. Today there isn't. There's a myriad of ways. In fact, the holy grail today is to look for frictionless type work. What we want is effortless. We want an app, we want a desire, we want a product or a service where in fact nothing stops. There's nothing between us and the end result. It's totally effortless in what we do and what we have. There is no friction. There are no cogs in the wheel. They're the things that are most successful today. To do that, we need to think of ourselves not as we are now, not as the milk carton. We need to forget what we are. Be true to our core and what we offer and what we think we're really good at. That's important. But what we need to do is to see ourselves constantly as this recycling container. We can constantly morph and change ourselves using technology, using big data, using 3D printing, using all kinds of things to be able to offer that personalized, hyper-personalized me approach to every customer. Change what you do. Incrementally evolve what it is you just say and do. Every time you do something, challenge yourself to think about whether it's still the best way to do it. On your agenda for your meetings, if you have them, put innovation, make it a regular conversation, not just a one-off. And if you truly want to take on the big boys, if you want to be that big disruptor, then play this game. Take a white piece of paper, blank piece of paper, take yourself forward to 2025 and think about what your world, your product, your service might be if you're starting from scratch. Absolutely no legacy system, no hierarchy, no money spent, nothing at all that you've got to lose, only upside. This is exactly what Uber did, exactly what Airbnb did, exactly what Facebook did. They didn't care about the legacy system. They didn't care about people saying this is the way it's always been done. What they were looking to do was to make it frictionless, to make it effortless, to understand this new world that we're moving into of business where all things are possible. Play that game. Go to 2025 and think about your industry, your product, your service, starting from scratch. How would it be? What would it be? What would it look like? Who would you sell it to? For how much? Where, when, and why? And then when you've done that, work back to today. Work back to this moment. And then begin to think about what you can do already that makes that end result theoretically 10 years away, but realistically achievable right now. What can you do to make that happen? And then use this 90-day planner to be able to bring it from your dreams to reality. Take a look at this planner in more detail. Go back to the site and have a look at how this is broken up. A series of 3 by 30 days, each of them taking you closer to your end result. Each of them asking you whether you should in fact move on or whether it's something you need to finish with. The reality is that you must take these brilliant ideas, all these things that are floating around, perhaps the possibilities that have arisen out of our conversation, and begin to action them, because thinking about them just isn't enough. Tomorrow is absolutely full of all the possibilities. It's absolutely full of all of the imagination that you want to bring to it. Tomorrow resides in your heart, your soul, and your mind. You can truly make it whatever you want it to be. There's so much new technology, so much new opportunity, so many new apps and marketplaces and customers. Really, the world offers you no limits. It is infinitesimal in what can be achieved. It's your reality that you have to bring to the market. I look forward to seeing what it is that you make of our conversation. I look forward to seeing the new products and services and to walking down the lands of the future with you. To connect with me, and I'd love you to do that. Let's carry on the conversation. To find out more about what I do and how I offer it. To find out more about the wonderful other speakers and experts at Business Blueprint, go across to this site, businessblueprint.com/experts. I look forward to seeing you both at that site and to speaking with you again in the very near future.